welcome to this worship service of the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg, the first of 4 services in what is now Black History Month, which began in 1926 as Black History Week, then 50 years later, in 1976, became the month it is today. Let's hope it's on its way to Black History Year every year, because Black history is American history. As a move to make real the sentiment in the banner on our Clover Lane sign that says Black Lives Matter, all the sources in this service are from Black authors. Our call to worship is by Black UU poet Everett Hoagland. Architect of icebergs, rainbows, jeweler of crystals, sand grains, snowflakes, atoms, mason whose tools are glaciers, rain, rivers, ocean, chemist who made blood of seawater, bone of minerals and stone, milk of love. Whatever you are, I know this. Spinner, you are everywhere, in all the ever-changing above, whirling about us. Yes, in the loose strands, in the rough weave of the common cloth threaded with our DNA on the hubbed, spoked spinning wheel that is this world, solar system, galaxy, universe. Help us to see ourselves in all creation, and all creation in ourselves in one another. Remind those of us who like connections made with similes, metaphors, symbols that all of us are, everything is already connected. Remind us that as the oceans go, so go we. As the air goes, so go we. As other life forms on Earth go, so go we. As our planet goes, so go we. Mysterious muse who inspired "in the beginning was the word," edit our thoughts so our ethics are our politics and our actions the afterlives of our words.
Good morning. I am Nan Cavenaugh. I'm a life member, a past president, and your lay liturgist for today. I share leadership of today's service with our UCH lay chaplain, Jim Cavenaugh, and my beloved husband, Yvonne Duvall, director of music, Hannah Belser, accompanist, Corey Ness, Director of Religious Exploration, Amy Firestein, our hardworking service tech, the UCH virtual trio of Kendra Trufanostock, Marcia Delaney, and James Henninger Voss. Additional music will be sung by Laura Shemick and Rima Cameron. To all our online worshipers, whether you are a member or a visitor, we are glad that you have chosen to join us this morning. An online coffee hour will follow today's services starting at 11:30 a.m. Please join via the link provided in the email you received this morning with today's service link. In the spirit of the transformative power of community in all forms, I am glad to welcome you to UCH. Whoever you are, wherever you live, whomever you love, whatever you do for a living, whenever you may be watching this service, you are welcome at the Unitarian Church of Harrisburg.
We Unitarian Universalists have a tradition of beginning a worship service by lighting a flame in a chalice. Our words for chalice lighting are by Black UU minister Byron Tyler Coles. Deep in the shadow of night, down near the crossroads and cemetery gates, with bitter liquor and cigar smoke waiting, I greet you. Clad in white, upon the floor before shrines, Following the names of the ancestors being uttered, I greet you. You are the great, sacred, and righteous rage of my people, echoing throughout time from lands of our elders, from depths of the oceans. I hear you now. You call out to us in the swirling winds, in the clamoring of lightning, in the crashing of waves, in the flow of rivers, in the rustling of forests, in clouds that move across the heavens, in the drumbeat of the earth. You are present in the cries of Black Lives Matter and No Justice, No Peace. You shimmer brightly in the flames of buildings crumbling to the ground as they are consumed in flame, in the calls for protest and direct action, in the stirring of pots, the laughter of children, in the tears and prayers of guardians. You are Black rage, holy and sacred, unbound and apologetic. You swell in the hips and breasts, in the curves, cheekbones, and nostrils, the beats of heart and pulsating thoughts, in exhaustion, in frustration, in numbness, in mobilization, in life. You name yourself as good. Holy and sacred Black rage, be ever present in our struggle for liberation, in our work to be, to love, to exist. Guide our movements in all their forms as we strive to be good ancestors, ensuring that our descendants might look upon our memory with favor. For you, for them, invite us to live without fear. Dear holy and sacred Black rage, give life to this valley of dry bones. Move like fire upon our spirits. Stir within us now and forevermore. And now we hear hymn 155, Circle Round for Freedom, which I selected, not just because it has a Black source, but because the words talk about for all of us in prison. And I've learned as a prison chaplain that there are only kinds of two people, the caught, the uncaught. And I have done things, as most of us have done things, that in a different situation could have gotten on the inside looking out. So think about that as we hear Circle Round for Freedom.
Sorry, folks, having a little technical difficulty getting my screen to share the video. Just bear with me a minute.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom. Circle round for peace. For all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom. Circle round for peace. For all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole.
Good morning. My name is Corey, and I serve as your Director of Religious Exploration. Today's story is titled Birds Learn About Friendship. It's a story about two birds that illustrate the power of the platinum rule when they treat one another with respect and kindness. Soon enough, other birds want to follow suit. This is an optimistic Burmese story. I want you to consider imagining the conversation between crow and present. Let's begin our story. There are 1,062 different kinds of birds that make their homes into jungles, wetlands, and along the coast of Burma. And once upon a time, those 1,062 kinds of birds did not get along. They were always making a terrible ruckus. Why do you flap your wings so fast? Your feathers are too red. With that technique, you'll never be able to catch a worm. Often, the birds got so carried away, they said, I'm a better bird than you. The reply was always, no, I'm a better bird than you. There was no friendship amongst the birds, and not much fun either. Finally, Pheasant grew weary. He didn't want to quarrel, so when Crow came along, ready to pick an argument, Pheasant said, Crow, you're a better bird than me. Crow was surprised. Those words warmed his heart, and he replied politely, No, Pheasant, you are a better bird than me. Pheasant's heart felt warm. The two struck up a conversation. They got to know one another and found that they really got along quite well. Before long, they decided to live side by side. The two birds enjoyed one another very much. Now, their conversations were completely different than they had been in the days of argument. One day, when Pheasant stood stock still, Crow noticed and said, "That was a good way to avoid being seen by enemies." Another time, when Crow was building a nest, Pheasant said, "Those sticks will make a good, strong nest, but have you thought about a way to make it a little softer inside?" Crow looked at the nest and then at his chest. He began to add some downy feathers. Talking and getting along like that made it easy to learn from each other and to be together. The two friends' affection for one another was obvious. The other birds were surprised. How could Pheasant and Crow spend so much time together without quarreling? Some decided to test the friendship. "Pheasant, why do you spend so much time with that good-for-nothing Crow?" "You mustn't say that," replied Pheasant. "Crow is a better bird than I, and he honors me by living with me." The next day, they went to Crow. "Crow, why do you spend so much time with that good-for-nothing Pheasant?" "You mustn't say that," replied Crow. "Pheasant is a better bird than I, and he honors me by living with me." The birds were deeply impressed by Crow and Pheasant's attitude to one another. They began to wonder, why do we always fight and quarrel? They watched how Crow and Pheasant treated one another and soon learned that it wasn't so difficult to be kind. They also learned that when they practiced compassion in the manner of Crow and Pheasant, life was far more enjoyable. And this is how friendship and respect developed among the birds.
There is so much in today's news and our lives to be angry about, isn't there? Anti-vaxxers, the threat to Roe v. Wade, even worse gerrymandering, the deadline of Congress, the deadlock in Congress, would that they had a deadline, civil wars, climate catastrophes everywhere, continuing gun violence, and rising prices, just to name a few concerns. As I look back over the last 5 years, it seems that I have been angry, really angry, more about more things, more often than any other time in my almost 78 years. No wonder I'm tired all the time. It's exhausting to be angry. And it's certainly not what I had in mind for my retirement years. And I'm aware that it's taking me in the opposite direction from practicing our UU values, as expressed in the February monthly theme, widening the circle. I need to step back a bit. Last weekend, my husband Jim and I celebrated a COVID-delayed Christmas with our two sons and their families here in Harrisburg. Serendipitously, some of the 10 of us ended up watching the film Inside, Outside, a surprisingly perceptive film from Pixar that was first released in 2015. I recommend it highly. In this animated film, the characters are the emotions of the preteen girl, Riley. Now, 5 main emotions are shown as cartoon caricatures, helping Riley to cope with the stresses of moving from Minnesota to California, where everything about her family's lives seems to be completely different and much less satisfying for her. The emotion Joy, who had been managing Riley's happy life, is not in control any longer. Instead, disgust, fear, sadness, and then anger take control. Now, anger is bright red and is shown blowing up a lot. Anger swells up, gives off steam, and then the top of his head literally blows off. Wow, this is just how I've been feeling. But as the plot continues, Riley takes some dangerous actions motivated by anger. Now, as a caring grandmother, I respond with a gasp. I never want any of our grandgirls or the one boy to take actions without thinking about the consequences. I was impressed by the parallels I could draw to my own life and this generalized anger. It made me think about how angry I continue to be with anti-vaxxers, the January 6 rioters, and all those who use guns in racial hatred. It made me think that bright red character of anger is certainly busy in many minds in 2022, including my own. I can see that anger is like a negative spiral that just keeps building and feeding upon itself. Soon, it's like an out of control tornado. It's as if all those hot winds of emotions are combining to create forest fires and blast into blizzards and tidal waves. And wow, stop. Take a deep breath, woman. Remember that anger is not the emotion that you want to control your life now or in the future. When the beloved 3-year-old granddaughter has an anger episode, and doesn't that sound so much better than a temper tantrum? In that anger episode, it's time for her to take a deep breath. And as your wise mama says, please use your words. That lesson should work for me too. It's time to regain control of my life by putting anger in its rightful place by using my words. It's time for reaching out and listening. If there's a chance that I can find a common bond or able to somehow widen the circle, I'll never reach that person I know by getting angry at them. That message might be useful to all of us at any age. It is up to each of us to practice our UU values by widening the circle as an alternative to being controlled by our rage. Peace be with you and all the people of the world.
Thank you, Nan. I always love the image of our daughter-in-law being a good mama, teaching Clara to use words. A few years ago, I was driving around running errands and I saw this bumper sticker. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. I was telling my wife, Nan, about it, and we both had a similar response. If you are outraged, will they hear what you're trying to say? Or maybe just go on the defensive and tune out your content? The trouble is, there's a lot in our society to be outraged about, from racism and white supremacy, to patriarchy, to poverty, to lack of access to adequate health care, to anti-LGBTQIA discrimination. I hope you get the idea because I could go on and on. I encountered a high level of rage in a friend I recruited to the board of the Pennsylvania Religious Coalition for Reproductive Justice. She's a queer Black woman minister from my seminary, and with her friends and family routinely being the target of discrimination or even violence, my friend could easily be outraged all the time. I brought up the bumper sticker at a coalition board meeting a while after she joined us because I was frankly troubled by my inclination to be outraged over all the terrible stuff going on to harm people I value, and yet my fear that if I am outraged, I will scare people away. What I wanted to know without really asking was, how do you control the outrage? But I learned a big lesson after the fact, dang it, that there is a major difference between the intent of what I say and the impact of my words. I think I came across as preaching at her that she needed to restrain her rage. This from a straight middle-class white guy. I fear she felt like I was disallowing her rage, or maybe telling her not to feel rage. She left the board a few months later, citing the press of other work, and I still miss her voice. And I still wonder how to balance my anger with my need to communicate with people who might or might not be listening. And I ponder, does anger drive my community ministry? It seems to, especially my drive for reproductive justice, which grew out of the struggle by women of color for social justice. And yet, in these pandemic times, I sometimes need to use all my energy just to cope with life as best I can. Maybe you've had the same need. Welcome to the club with a motto I just invented. I would be angry about stuff if all my energy wasn't needed for just surviving. Yes, I have learned that anger can be good for me and my community ministry. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, when I'm angry, I can write, pray, and preach well, for then my whole temperament is quickened, my understanding sharpened, and all mundane vexations and temptations depart. Yes, when I'm angry, I have energy to think and write some more, and minor issues fade away. I was writing this sermon late in the evening, but my awareness of the terrible racism our country has experienced in 1619 pushed me to keep on. And a calendar beside me at my workstation from the Equal Justice Initiative helps me keep my anti-racism focus. An unlikely source, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, dictated a book called Be Angry, in which he encouraged us to feel anger about injustice. He tells us anger brings more energy, more determination, more forceful action to correct injustice. To be angry on behalf of those who are treated unjustly means we have compassionate anger. He continues, anger towards social injustice will remain until the goal is achieved. It has to remain. One should truly continue to harbor a feeling of anger. Wow. When this icon of peace encourages us to keep on being angry until injustice is dealt with, that's a pretty strong encouragement. So I will keep writing these words and preaching them and doing my community ministry. Several of the authors in a new book, Toward a Theology of Holy Black Rage, quote James Baldwin. In 1961, author James Baldwin was asked by a radio host about being Black in America. He said, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time and in one's work. And part of the rage is this. It isn't only what's happening to you, but it's what's happening all around you and all of the time in the face of the most extraordinary and criminal indifference of most white people in this country and their ignorance." This may be one of the most famous of Baldwin's quotes, and of the 15 essays in the book, many use these words. They help me appreciate what people of color in general and Black people in particular have as an integral part of their lives. Many of the essays in the book draw on the Christian Bible, specifically the Gospel according to John in chapter 2, which tells us that Jesus made a whip and drove all the money changers out of the temple. This angry outburst has become legendary as an example of righteous rage and an inspiration to many. However, if I did something like that nowadays, I would be arrested and locked up, and my community ministry as a prison chaplain would be ended. So I control myself, sometimes with difficulty. A more current writer, Brittany Cooper, in her 2018 book, Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower, tells of countless times when she, like other Black women such as Michelle Obama, was judged disrespectfully because of her hairstyle or her clothing choices or both. Rage is a fundamentally more reasonable response to America's cultural investment in the disrespect of Black women than being respectable. Rage is a refusal of the lie that Black women's anger in the face of routine, everyday injustice is not legitimate. As I read Cooper's words, I could feel myself catching her rage, getting warmer, and wanting to do something to improve the situation. But finding a balance between feeling enough anger to move me to action and yet not letting it consume me is a struggle I deal with all the time. And I feel certain that people of color deal with it routinely. Take a recent headline in the Sunday Patriot News, healthcare. Racial bias can be a barrier to quality care. But the article under the headline goes on to document the reality that racial bias is a barrier to quality healthcare, not just can be. The article tells us for 2 decades now, the National Healthcare Disparities Report has found that white patients receive better quality of care than Black Americans, Hispanic, American Indian, and Asian patients. The lack of quality healthcare has got to be on the mind of every person of color. This has been an issue for many years, and it's especially important in these COVID times. Martin Luther King Jr. was speaking out about it in 1966 when he said, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhuman." If I were a parent raising a child of color, this is the injustice that would keep me awake at night, particularly after my child was old enough to leave home where they could be hurt, maybe in need of medical care, and not likely to receive the care needed because of racial bias. Violence against people of color continues in our country in spite of the protests and court cases. In The Fire this time, a new generation speaks about race. Isabel Wilkerson, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, made an amazing observation, telling us it seems the rate of police killings now surpasses the rate of lynchings during the worst decades of the Jim Crow era. There was a lynching every 4 days in the early decades of the 20th century. It's been estimated that an African American is now killed by police every 2 to 3 days. That shocked me, and I bet it shocks you. Bear in mind, this was written in 2015 before the police killings of George Floyd, Stephon Clark, Bothan Jean, Breonna Taylor, Dante Wright, Andre Hill, Atiana Jefferson, Alton Sterling, Philandro Castile, Manuel Ellis, and of course, Amir Locke this past Wednesday. By the way, if you want to take your reaction to a positive place, read Defund Fear, the book chosen as our UUA's common read for this year, and then join the UCH discussion group coming up in March. I don't mind telling you there are days when I struggle to contain my rage at the incredible injustices people of color face in this country, where we are asked to pledge allegiance to the flag with liberty and justice for all. What kind of BS is that? There is clearly not liberty and justice for all, is there? I liken my anger to a fire, and Robin Wall Kimmerer, in her book Grading Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, tells us there are different kinds of fires. For example, there are the sacred fires where people use for ceremonial occasions, campfires needed for warmth and cooking, and for the forest fires that consume all in their path. Clearly, my anger needs to be more like a campfire that serves us than a forest fire that destroys. Back when homes were heated by a fireplace or a wood stove, the fire could be banked for the night by covering the coals with a layer of ashes so they would smolder quietly and then be rekindled the next morning without the need to start a fire from scratch. I need to work on banking my fire from time to time when I need to cope with life's problems or with my own need for self-care. As E.B. White told us, I arise in the morning torn between the desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day, and that goes for me as well. I've learned the hard way that neglecting my mental health is a bad idea, and so my self-care has several dimensions. The first is appreciating what I call my inner space, the mental space between what happens to me and how I react to it. I learned about inner space by reading Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, in which he tells how he survived Nazi concentration camp by practicing the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances. Stephen Covey later popularized the idea in his best-selling book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, only he called it freedom to choose. I've taught the idea of inner space and the freedom to choose it gives us to many inmates in Dauphin County Prison, many of whom were there because they reacted to a situation without thinking, without using their inner space to decide how to react. Without going into lurid details, suffice it to say that a situation that seems like a hot fire due to rage need not drive us to action in a way that harms. In conclusion, in an effort to improve my inner space, I've begun a modest practice of meditating daily, and that seems to help. Here's a little song that has helped a beginner like me that Thich Nhat Hanh put in his classic book, The Blooming of a Lotus. In, out, deep, slow, calm, ease, smile, release, present moment, wonderful moment. I can sing it or breathe it, but not really at the same time. Believe me, I've tried and I keep on trying. Slow. When we are beset by the fire of anger, may peace enter our lives so we can decide how to react mindfully. Blessed be and amen. Let us take time to breathe in, breathe out, following the guidance of Thich Nhat Hanh, who taught us to center in the moment. While he was not Black, he was Vietnamese, and Asians were treated shamefully by our country when World War II began, interned, which is another word for imprisoned. He died recently, but his teachings are immortal and they live on. Somewhere, people are hurting, people are experiencing joy, people are worried, people are wondering how to pay the next bill, and our message, as you used to each, is you matter. We have 3 heavy concerns to share this morning. First, from Carol and Charles Bird, our beloved brother-in-law, James Jarena, died last week, and we lost our very dear pet, Dallas, on the very same day. It has been a very sad week for our family. And from Sharon Vaughn, my father, Glenn Newsom, passed away January 30th in Lubbock, Texas. He had been under hospice care since mid-November. He was able to be at home, and for that we are thankful. He'd had a difficult last few weeks, so I'm also thankful he is no longer in pain. Natalie and I are planning to travel to Texas in the near future to see family and celebrate our lives. Karen, our hearts and prayers are with you, as with Carol and Charles Bird. And from Kevin Geist, on January 31st, Carl Back, father of Andy Back, died from esophageal cancer. His children were around his bed, singing hymns and reading poetry to him. His wife sent him off with loving words. His suffering is done. And an update from Kevin. You may have read that there would be a memorial service for Carl Back this weekend, but there will not be. Several family members have contracted COVID and we will need to wait. Please do not plan to attend any memorial service for our dear Carl this weekend. They've been postponed indefinitely. When there is birth, life goes on. When there is death, life goes on. When there is joy, life goes on. When there is sorrow, life goes on. Because, as Reverend David reminded us last Sunday, my lot is bound up with that of the human race. We are all in this together. And I repeat to all who are in this service, you matter.
Please join me in the unison affirmation that is printed on your screen. Love is the spirit of our congregation, and service is our gift. This is our great covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek our truths in love, and to help one another. The Unitarian Church, as always, is a freely gathered church of free people. The church is created, sustained, and supported by you. The ministry continues whether the church building is open or closed. During the month of February, our plate offering will go to the Harrisburg International Service Center, or ISC. The Harrisburg ISC is a 501c3 organization located at 21 South River Street in Harrisburg. It was founded in 1976 to provide services to Vietnamese refugees in central Pennsylvania. It continues today and, among other things, provides language, housing, health, orientation, and other services to immigrants. Recently, the ISC established the Afghan Placement Assistance, also known as APA, project. A few weeks ago, the ISC published a request for assistance from the community for Afghan refugees sent to the Harrisburg area for resettlement. I think there are between 30 and 40 of them. In addition to a request for volunteers and donations of specific household items, the ISC is asking for financial donations for the APA project. Dorothy Brown alerted us to the APA project and nominated ISC to share the plate. Thank you, Dorothy. For those who wish to contribute, please see the email with the link for today's service or visit UCHHarrisburg.org homepage for options for contributing. Your financial support and commitment matter. Please consider giving what you are able.
Amen. 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 Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen. Sing it louder now. Amen. 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 Amen.
Thank you, Laura and Rima. One of my favorite sing-alongs. Our benediction, Only Begun, is by Reverend William Singer, the first Black president of our Unitarian Universalist Association. Spirit of life and love, dear God of all nations, there is so much work to do. We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy. Help us hold fast to our vision of what can be. May we see the hope in our history and find the courage and the voice to work for that constant rebirth of freedom and justice. That is our dream. Amen.
Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children